Before we start, we need plastic container and carbon rod. We can get carbon rod from dead Dreisels. I'm using a screwdriver for this purpose, pinching and pulling off the top cover. Then peel off the cap and expose the rod. Then switch to prise and pull the rod from the case, and finally we have the rod. Then mark it with handsaw ready to install in plastic container. This mark is very important, especially when we start wiring the setup. I'm now cutting a hole on container to install my carbon rod. This hole should have nearly less diameter compared to that of carbon rod in order to fit the rod properly and avoid minor gaps to increase efficiency. After cutting plastic off, I'm placing the carbon rod with less effort to force it to pass through the gap. When 3/4 of the rod has passed and now inside, we can now apply glue to cover minor holes. I'm using gray TV glue for this purpose. Epoxy glue will work too. I'm now applying excess glue surrounding the rod to cover all holes around. Glue will also help to stabilize the carbon rod and avoid it from shaking in case of minor shocks when the setup falls down. After applying glue, it's time to spread it around the rod. I'm using my fingers to do this because I feel more comfortable when I do so. You can use stick or brush or anything you feel comfortable when you use. Repeat the same steps inside too. After applying glue, I left my container under sun to dry up. Few minutes later, the container had dried up and ready for use. Checking outer and inner sides, both are good, and we can now install a single wire around this point. I'm using copper wire because it's only wire I have at a moment. Passing it around the rod, then tie it strongly and tightly to avoid it from loosening. After tying the rod with wire, I need a base to rest the whole setup on, so I will use this plaster block as my base. Using my handsaw, I'm cutting the block into 2 smaller blocks for the setup. Few seconds later, the blocks were done and ready to handle the setup. It's now time to place our container over the block. It seemed to fit well when we place, and we can now add water inside the container. To power this cell, I'm using my PC charger. I'm now connecting my carbon rod at anode. This is important because carbon rod can resist corrosion from chlorine. After connecting anode, it's now time to connect cathode, and I'm using aluminum as my cathode. Though aluminum will keep on corroding due to reaction with sodium hydroxide. I'm now tying wire to my aluminum cathode and place it inside plastic container. We all know ordinary water is less conductive. To increase its conductivity, we must add salt. Since we aim at producing chlorine gas, we will use a lot of salt because salt is the only raw material to give us chlorine gas. We can now see how our solution can conduct electricity. It's now time to collect gas, so we need a plastic bottle filled with water. To place the bottle, invert it upside down and ensure its cover is immersed in water. Open your bottle cover while in water and gently shift it over carbon electrode and let it cover the rod ready to collect gas. When done, turn on power and observe gas collection. You can now see some bubbles traveling inside the bottle starting from the bottom and collect themselves at the top. These bubbles contain chlorine gas in them and travel up because chlorine gas is less dense than water. As time goes on, the bubbles are collected and accumulated, leaving a space containing chlorine gas. After long operation of the cell, water is displaced from the bottle by chlorine gas. This leads to increase in volume inside the container, so we have to reduce it by pouring excess water into another container. Few minutes later, almost all water had been displaced. We can now see greenish gas inside the bottle. The gas is chlorine, which we aim to produce. This is enough for me, so I'm now unplugging the setup from electricity. It's now time to extract the gas by gently pulling the bottle up. Then close it with cover to avoid the gas from escaping. Finally, we got the gas we aimed. This marks the end of my today's project, and I welcome you back to my channel. I will be uploading videos every Sunday after 2 weeks. Support me by being my subscriber, and also like, share and comment when I'm not clear for further modified explanations. By saying so, goodbye and see you next time.